in their wake, the peace in the temple is palpable. There are plenty of seats for those whose devotion is year-round, and plenty of time to talk together about things that matter. And it appears that that's what Jesus is doing. Not only is he part of a family that cherishes these rituals and participation in the faith experiences, taking their children to Jerusalem at Passover time so that they can be, but one has a hint that behind the scenes, on a regular basis, a daily and weekly basis, Jesus is growing up in a family that cherishes the stories and scriptures of its faith, that is nurturing Jesus in that faith in a way that allows him to grow and deepen his wisdom and understanding, the questions he asks and the answers he is able to give. And so, although it may have been a source of anxiety to his parents that, having traveled for a full day, when they camped that night on their way back to Nazareth, they realized that Jesus wasn't with them and wasn't with cousins or other family or neighbors from Nazareth. In fact, Jesus was nowhere in that group. And so they headed back to Jerusalem and looked high and low until eventually they found him there in the temple, in that place of quiet teaching and reflection, sitting with the rabbis and teachers, listening, the text tells us, and asking questions. But undoubtedly, the rabbis were also asking questions back, perhaps to see how much Jesus knew, had learned, and understood. And they, in turn, were amazed at his answers. His faith was growing and deepening. He had a divine understanding that would become the basis of his adult ministry and teaching. And the temple was a place that was precious to him. So part of this story kind of leads us past Christmas into life in the real world, with all the things that we need to be attending to because life moves on. We grow up and our children grow, just as Samuel grew each year, and so his mother brought him a new robe, each year a little larger. One can imagine a closet with tiny little robes, and then growing as the young boy grew. It's about growth, but it's also about connection and learning that God is there always, even when life is challenging and difficult. And the reality is this Christmas season has not been an easy one for many. Some, certainly in Newtown, are still very much affected by that tragedy pre-Christmas, pre-Hanukkah. And we know that the light that God shines in the world is a light that does not go out. We hold on to that with as much commitment as we hug our children a little closer. One of the pastors who wrote a sermon on this passage from Luke made reference to an additional story, and it connected with a book which I'd purchased. It was talking about God seeing between the blinks. We're human. Our eyes blink. We don't see the world whole. But God never blinks. And there's a book that I have had on my shelf for several months now with that title, God Never Blinks. It's called 50 Lessons for Life's Little Detours. And I want to share some portions of this because it does indeed also make a Christmas connection. In one of his novels, Chaim Potok describes how God sees versus how humans see. We see the world as fragmented, he says, because we blink, but God, who never blinks, sees the entire universe as we cannot see it, whole. Imagine what we might see in a lifetime of not blinking. Some people believe that a few rare others see in the blinks. The art critic Sister Maria Gloria Riva once told an interviewer that saints and artists can see between blinks. If you examine their creations, the beauty of wholeness shines through. They see with the vision of faith. To paraphrase her, if you have faith, you can see beyond the limitations of most vision. You can see the light of a now, where others see only the darkness in the not yet. And then the author of this book goes on to say, I met a man who could see the now in the not yet. Everything in his life changed in the blink of an eye one Christmas. And she goes on to tell the story of Father Mike. He got a call while he was out of town. His home, the church rectory, was in flames. He rushed back to news that kept getting worse. His best friend, the church pastor, was missing. No one could find Father Willie. Then the bishop called. Firefighters had found a body in the rubble, and it was indeed Father Willie. Everyone at St. Stanislaus Church in Cleveland's Slavic village loved him. He was the pastor of a beautiful, ornate Polish church that the Franciscan priests shepherded. The day of the fire, Father Mike arrived at the church for 5 o'clock Mass. He held it together as the people prayed, Lamb of God, have mercy on us. And then he looked up, and he saw the altar boys and girls. Every single one of them had shown up. They'd called one another, and they'd all come to church. They stood there in their cassocks, their faces soaked in tears, and Father Mike wept. That night, Father Mike lay in bed knowing he'd lost everything, his possessions, his home, his friend. He wandered through the rubble the next day, through the blackened halls, smell of smoke, the shards of glass, the bare wires. He was homeless. His dear friend was gone. Everyone in the church was devastated. It was the most despair he'd ever felt. When he opened the door, a woman approached him. An angel, he calls her now. How are you? She asked. He told the truth. I have nothing. She looked at him and said 3 words that changed his life. You have us. Since then, he's recalculated. I've got everything, he says. That night took him to the essence of what it means to be Franciscan, when your only attachment is to God and to love. You have everything that matters. He had worn the long, simple brown robe of St. Francis for 20 years, but that was the moment he believes he became a Franciscan. And then, as he walked through the burned rectory, seeing all of the charred remains of home and office, he noticed on a wall blackened by smoke a cross had left its imprint in bright white, so bright it seemed to glow in the dark. He walked through the kitchen where he and Father Willie had shared meals together. He stopped in the living room where they had put up the Christmas tree. And he wondered, how would the people of the parish celebrate Christmas? How could they celebrate anything? But the people at St. Stanislaus knew that Christmas would be tough. So they found the widest, tallest tree for the church. It climbed 17 feet. They covered it in lights, and everyone in this tough old Polish parish brought an ornament from home to decorate it. It was the most glorious tree they'd ever seen. A smile comes over Father Mike whenever he talks about that Christmas, the darkest and brightest Christmas of his life. He picks up a worn black Bible, bent nearly in half down the middle, creased from being opened so often. He skims John 1:5. and grins when he finds the